The journey to becoming a better photographer is so much more than upgrading your camera and searching for hashtag photography hacks. To become a better photographer with your own voice, to become a better photographer, one that makes images with impact, it requires a deep understanding of the fundamentals of photography. It requires a deep understanding of your ability to see and utilize light. And it comes from consistent shooting to develop your own creative voice. Hey, welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast, brought to you by CloudSpot, the all-in-one solution for photographers of all skill levels to deliver and sell your photos online. Today, we are continuing our 10-part manifesto series. And with today's episode, we are, guess what? Halfway through. So if you haven't heard the whole Photography Manifesto overview episode already, then be sure to check out episode 334 of the podcast. In it, I kind of go over all 10 Photography Manifesto rules and give you a brief description. And these episodes are just full breakdowns of exactly what it is that we're talking about and how you can implement them into becoming a better photographer yourself, because I know that that is your goal. And all these videos online of hashtag photography hacks are not going to help you get there. It's the information in this Photography Manifesto that will. So, this Photography Manifesto was created with more than 10 years of professional photography experience and with some of the most important takeaways that I picked up from interviewing more than 300 of the world's best photographers here on the podcast. So, why don't we go ahead and dive on to what really matters in photography with the Photography Manifesto rule number 5. Now, as a quick recap, Photography Manifesto rule number 1 is the point of photography is to enrich the human experience. Photography Manifesto rule number 2 is to be a halfway decent photographer, you must dedicate all of your time to it. Manifesto rule number 3 is moment matters most in a photograph, not camera settings. Manifesto rule number 4 is you don't need to know everything in photography to know anything in photography. And today, Photography Manifesto rule number 5 is your camera gear is not holding you back. You are holding yourself back. Ooh, that hurts to hear. That hurts to say. I am holding myself back. Oh my gosh. Okay. For the rest of this interview, I want to assume that you understand the basics of photography. I understand that this is the Beginner Photography Podcast, but for the Manifesto series, some of this is what is next after you understand your camera settings. So I have to assume that you understand the basics of photography for the rest of this episode. And if you don't, well, if you don't understand how, your camera settings are going to affect an image, then what's the phrase? You are showing up to the game with only half a deck, right? If that is you and you do need help with your camera settings, then I'm here to help. You can grab my free downloadable and printable guide, Picture Perfect Camera Settings, over at perfectcamerasettings.com. That is where I share my own personal and professional images for 10 popular types of photography, along with the settings that I use to capture those images and how to know when to change which setting and why to get the shot that you want. So again, that's perfectcamerasettings.com to grab that for yourself. But if you do know your camera settings, then today I want to share with you exactly how to regain control of your camera so that it is no longer holding you back. And I will be totally honest with you. I personally held off starting my own photography business until I was, quote unquote, official with a full frame camera and all the right lenses and multiple flashes. And I think some of that was just fear that I'd show up to a wedding and clients would see my measly Canon 40D and they would just laugh at me. So I let it hold me back, and that's unfortunate. So if you are there too, then today we are going to fix that. But the first thing that we need to cover is a bit of a mindset change. We live in this great time technologically. We live in this time where we are advancing so fast in technology that it is so exciting. But we have to remember that great photos have been being taken way before your camera was made, let alone the most current flagship camera. A Leica, let's take a Leica for example, right? Leica is a very prestigious camera. Leica is known as a photographer's camera. The Leica is your favorite photographer's dream camera. But your entry-level, $400 camera that you got at Walmart or whatever is technologically far superior to these hunks of metal and dials that are Leicas. And Leicas sell for, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars today. Some of the most iconic images in history were taken without eye-tracking autofocus or in-body camera image stabilization or super amazing low-light capabilities. And yet, they still stand the test of time. Why? Photographers like Ansel Adams, photographers like Henri Cartier-Bresson, photographers like Vivian Maier, so many others. These photographers were able to capture images that have literally shaped history. How? How do they do it? How do they do it without 30 frames per second burst rate? How do they do it without lenses that would even go to f2.8? How do they do it? That is exactly what I want to share with you today. Now, just to be clear, this is not a these dang kids today with their newfangled technology type rant, I promise you. But all of these photographers, successful photographers who have captured iconic images, they have traits in common. And these traits are not just, I'm just an old guy wishing for the good old days, but these are practical tips that are honestly camera agnostic and work the same if you have a cell phone or if you do have that current flagship camera. You can apply these exact traits today and you will see an immediate improvement in your own photography. Rule number one, not rule number one, step number one, part number one, aspect number one, whatever you want to call it. The first thing that these photographers have in common, this trait number one, there we go, is that they have all mastered the tool at hand. So I know that I've shared a similar example, or maybe even this exact example on the podcast before, but a hammer looks like a very simple tool, right? There's no buttons on a hammer. There's no settings on a hammer. There's no dials on a hammer. But despite that, a veteran carpenter can still, just run circles around an 8-year-old who's using a hammer for the first time. And it's not because one of them listened to the Beginner Hammer podcast or they watched YouTube videos about the right settings to use for your hammer or they read blogs about hammers. It's because they used their hammer. And when they used their hammer, that taught them how to better use their hammer. It may sound boring, I get it, but I can personally tell you that reading your camera's manual is a fascinating read. Maybe you don't want to bring it with you on a beach on your next vacation, but it is still a fascinating read. Just learning what your camera can do, I found, can really spark creativity. Just in the simple ways of learning something new, get you excited that you want to go try it out. And then when you try it out, you get better. And then that's just one more skill to add to your photography toolkit. Now, I personally did not know that my camera had a focus mode that activates, specifically when objects are fast appearing until I read my camera's manual. And once I figured that out and I started to use it, at first I was like, this makes no sense. I'm not photographing race cars. I'm not photographing birds flying out of trees. I'm not photographing ski jumps. But what I did figure out is that it works really well when photographing my kids when we're playing a game like hide and seek, or we're just outside playing in the backyard and they're popping out from behind trees and whatnot. It just made my life and capturing those photos of my kids so much easier. And now I am one step closer to mastering the tool at hand. Trait number 2 that these photographers have that make them the iconic photographers that they are is that they know the story that they are telling. In its most simple form, photography is a light-proof box that when you press a button, it allows some light in and it records that light. And that's it. That's the tool that you have to master. But once you do, it's a tool for storytelling. Every image is a story. A great photo is one in which the moment of the photo resonates with the viewer. I think, one of the most iconic photos ever is the Depression-era mother with hungry young children just hanging on her. When you look at her eyes and you feel it, you ask yourself, how is she going to feed those children? Where are they going to sleep tonight? You don't care, that the lens on that camera only opened up to f11. The settings become invisible because we are so sympathetic to the story that we are being told. The photographer knew the story. Knowing the story that you are telling in an image takes many things. It's not easy. It takes an understanding of your subject. It takes an ability to observe what's going on, more so than just what they're literally doing. And it requires patience. Just because you know the story that you want to tell does not mean that it's just going to happen. As a photographer, you make it happen. You are patiently waiting for a fleeting expression, or you plan for certain elements to align. Photographer Joel Meyerowitz is, a genius at that. Or you put yourself in a place to where that slice of light is just perfect. Only you can know the story that you are telling. And then it's up to you to use the elements around you to enhance that story, to best tell that story. In photojournalism, the idea is that you want to capture the entire story in one photo, right? I think in your head right now, if I were to tell you crime type photo, in my head, I see frame left, I see a house, I see some caution tape in the foreground, I see police and investigators in the front of the house, and they are looking for clues or evidence. And then frame right, I see the coroner walking out with a stretcher and the sheet over the stretcher and a toe tag, even though, I don't know, toe tag gets added later. I don't know how it all works. Anyway, I can see that photo in my head, right? That's the full story. There's a mystery here. Somebody is dead. And there's a mystery, and we need to figure out what happened. We know where it happened. We see the house. We know what happened. Somebody dead. We don't know why it happened, but we know that people are trying to figure it out. But the detectives, walking around looking for evidence. That's one photo. And that seems easy to do. But I promise you, it is not. Because sometimes it's not as easy as a story being that big that you have to tell it in one image. Sometimes the story is an emotion. Sometimes the story is light. Sometimes the story is smaller than a crime scene, a murder investigation. And you have to do your best to know that story so that you can tell it. Trait number 3, these photographers have a creative voice. Like I said, photography is storytelling. But once you know the story, your creative voice dictates how you tell that story. Photography is more than just capturing what is happening in front of your lens, right? We know this. Photography is your way to show off how you see the world through your own unique lens. No pun intended. Now, before you grab your pen and paper and get ready to write down how to create your own creative voice in 3 easy steps, you need to know that your creative voice cannot be engineered. I'm going to say that again. Your creative voice cannot be engineered. I'm going to say it again. No, I'm just kidding. The point is that you cannot say, I'm going to shoot just pink stuff and then just do that. Technically you can, but it won't last, right? Because you're going to get bored because you manufacture this just out of thin air. If you're not really into pink stuff, why are you photographing pink stuff? Your creative voice it's an organic amalgamation of the subjects that you shoot, of the compositions that you use, the light that you paint with, the mood that your images evoke, or Sure, the colors that you use too. Your creative voice is everything. It's all of it. It's everything. It's everywhere. It's all at once. It is so much stuff. And it is so much stuff, in fact, that it makes it impossible to manufacture, to fake. There's just so much that goes into it that you wouldn't do it. Your creative voice is going to evolve with you. So as you grow, as you evolve as a photographer, your creative voice will too. And it comes from within. And it's not like you have to just go out into the woods for 4 days on your own and try to figure it out yourself. You just have to pull it out. And the only way to do that is by experimenting with your camera, by looking at the photos that you shoot, asking yourself, do I like this photo? Do I not like this photo? What could be improved upon? That introspection. But all of that comes with a whole lot of shooting. It's not something that a quote unquote better camera is going to give you. It comes from within. And I truly understand how hard of an idea or of a concept that seems like, because for a long time I didn't think that I necessarily had a creative voice of my own. I, wrongfully thought that I had to put in the work and create something myself. And maybe I only shoot with a 35mm lens, or maybe I only shoot backlight. But one day, after shooting weddings and engagements for so long, I shot a motorcycle race for a buddy. And when I got back and I uploaded the photos onto my computer, I noticed that I shot it in a very similar way, visually, as I would weddings. And I love the photos. They felt fresh, certainly fresher than what I would, normally see when it came to motorcycle photos. And I knew that when I had seen that, I had a creative voice. I was looking at my creative voice. Sometimes you're just so close to something that you can't even see it. You have no idea what you're looking at. And it's not until you take a step back, you get out of your comfort zone, and you shoot something totally different, that you can discover your creative voice. So do that. Get out of your comfort zone. Shoot something totally different so that you can discover your creative voice. And don't do any research on, what quote unquote motorcycle racing looks like for you or whatever. Just show up and shoot. That is it. That is how you find your creative voice. You just show up and you shoot. The journey to becoming a better photographer is so much more than upgrading your camera and searching for hashtag photography hacks. To become a better photographer with your own voice, to become a better photographer, one that makes images with impact, it requires a deep understanding of the fundamentals of photography. It requires a deep understanding of your ability to see and utilize light. And it comes from consistent shooting to develop your own creative voice. And unfortunately, no technology can, how do I phrase this carefully? No amount of technology can replace the importance of the moment in the story of an image. I think I got that right. I understand how tempting it is, honestly, to look for shortcuts, to see what popular photographers are posting and just assuming that you can just kind of do that same thing, or maybe placing the blame on our own equipment when we don't get what we want out of it. But photography is like all things, and the real growth comes from leaning into the learning process and consistently pushing our known boundaries. So, know your boundaries. Figure out what those are. Where are you struggling? Push those. So before you go out and you buy that new fancy schmancy camera because that one YouTuber said, oh, it's super lit, I want you to really ask yourself, that was so embarrassing. I really want you to ask yourself, are you making the most out of the gear that you already have? On our photography journey, the path to greatness may not be an easy one, but it will certainly be more rewarding when you get there on your own accord. That is it for today. Remember to check out the entire Photography Manifesto overview episode, if you haven't listened to it already, at episode 334. I truly want to help you become the photographer who you want to become, not just a photographer who follows my plan and gets somewhere. Photography comes from within. And I just simply want to show you the tools that are available for you to get there and become your own photographer, not the photographer of the day. So again, that is it for today. Remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. I promise. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.